That plane there, that's a DC-3. And that's both my father and my favorite plane. It's the most beautiful plane. And it's the plane my father first flew commercial on. See, that's the real thing. In fact, I've sat with him in that plane when he used to fly it. That's a King Air. That one. I don't remember this exact one, but generally whenever I was in a plane or a helicopter with my dad, I was put into the cockpit. What he'd do is he'd ask me about all the instruments and ask me questions, and we'd do the flight check together. So we'd walk around the plane, and then he'd ask me, okay, so what's that and what's that and what's that. And then later when I was in college, I learned how to fly. I remember we once went to Jaipur, Udaipur, and then we went to Bombay, and then we went to Srinagar as well. It was very exciting because these were all normally early morning flights. So sometimes it would just be a surprise. He'd come into my room. I remember once he came into my room at about 3:30 in the morning. He's like, okay, get ready. So I was like, what is this? Get ready. So he didn't tell me why or anything like that. So I was like, okay. I had a little aluminium case this big. I packed it with, my shirts and my pants and my shoes. And then I remember walking out in the dark and going. So we were going on a flight. And then I remember I sat in the jump seat. Those days, it was pre 9/11, so you could sit in the jump seat. And I remember sitting in the jump seat of a big plane for the first time, and him pointing out different things, and then starting the engine, which for us mechanical people is fantastic. So I can still remember it. And then there was a problem. There was some sort of a technical problem. It was an Avro, and the technical problem, so it was delayed. So I spent quite a lot of time in the cockpit while my father was trying to fix the problem on the ground. And then I remember when we took off, wonderful. Look, if you're a pilot, that's a risk you take. I mean, that's just something that you take it. So my father told my uncle, because my uncle was flying a very particular type of plane, a Pitts Special. It's a very aggressive plane. My father told him that, don't do this. My uncle really didn't have the experience. My uncle had similar hours to what I have, about 300, 350 hours. And he shouldn't have been flying that plane. And he flew it, and that's what happens when you don't have the experience and you fly. It's easy to kill yourself. Yeah, my mother was worried. So every time my father would go on a flight, it would be, my mother would have this record playing in the background that he's on a flight, it's so dangerous, and she'd be worried and she'd be transferring the word. Then once there was a problem. It was sometime, it was on the Kashmir. There was some problem with Kashmir, and then there was some issue with his aircraft. So my mother, I remember, getting very worked up. Pilots have a very particular ability that comes from their training. And it is this idea that you have to move from a 30,000 foot vision to details in the cockpit. If you lose track of details in the cockpit, you run into trouble. And if you lose track of the 30,000 foot picture, you run into trouble. So a pilot, and I am one, we move from these two spaces very seamlessly and very quickly. Pilots also, when they fly, their imagination isn't blocked by roads, by railway lines. Their imagination is at 30,000 feet, so they have this ability to see large systems. And this is what really helped my father. I could see this process taking place where he would go and meet people, get into their details, understand their details, and then instantly move to 30, 40, 50,000 feet and look at the big picture. And his work was constantly moving between these two
perspectives. And always understanding that imagination can bridge anything. So that to me was a very powerful thing that my father had.
That's the A3 Airbus, A320. One of his big regrets was that he left the airline and couldn't fly the bigger jets. That's a fighter plane. So I think both of us would have actually loved to do that. Didn't really get the opportunity.